So good afternoon. Thanks for coming over. I appreciate you all spending your afternoon listening to us talk to you about Xamarin and C# and testing. So can I get a show of hands for those of you who are .NET developers? Amazing. Who has written a mobile app? I got it in the App Store today. Okay. So those of you who put your hands up, were you using Xamarin? Great stuff. The rest of you, was it hybrid? Objective-C? Java? Something else? Interesting. So a lot of you are .NET developers, and my session for the next 50 minutes is going to be covering how to take your existing C# or F# skills and bring them over to iOS, Android, and the Mac if you're interested in desktop. So who is this guy? I'm Mike James. I'm a developer evangelist at Xamarin. It's my job to travel around Europe and teach people how to take their existing C# skills and run it everywhere. So I've got a couple of apps that I've built which are open source. You can grab those today. They're on GitHub. We've got beer drinking. I'm a big beer fan. In fact, the demos you're going to see today are very much based around beer. So what I'm doing with beer drinking is it's an iOS app at the moment. It will come to Android and Windows Phone eventually, but it's still very much in development. So if you want to see some horrible C# code that I've written whilst testing beer drinking, go and have a look at that. It uses Azure, so I've got offline sync because I wanted to be able to get into pubs and still be able to search. So cache all the beers for the country that I'm in, top most 100 beers. It's my attempt at trying to make a native Untapped, because Untapped uses Cordova, which is horrible. I built a step counter for iOS, and we have an Android version as well. It uses call motion. And then I built Dutch spelling, because I moved to Belgium for 7 months, and I wanted to learn Flemish. But then instead I taught myself Dutch, because they're basically the same. But I ended up moving to a French-speaking region, so that was a waste of time. And then I built Hydrate, which is a Mac app. So it's built with Xamarin Mac. That isn't open source, but it's because I wrote it in 20 minutes whilst eating a sandwich. So the code is horrific. But what's interesting to note about Hydrate is because it's in the Mac store, there's no competition in the Mac store. There's about 20,000 apps in there. So that gets downloaded way more than my other apps, and it earns me more than my other apps combined. So if you want to earn easy money, go and build a Mac app and throw it in the Mac App Store. It's an untapped resource. So all of these are built using C#. So I'm a C# developer. I love C#. I've been writing with .NET since I was 13. It's my favorite framework to use. But I've not always used .NET, but I've always been a cross-platform developer. Before I worked for Xamarin, I worked for a company in London, and we built embedded lighting controllers. So this was built using Qt, so it's C++, and we controlled installations such as the London Eye. So the lights around the London Eye controlled by these boxes. And the engineers at the London Eye, they said to me that they wanted to be able to control the lights from their iPads and their iPhones. And we thought that sounded like a reasonable request, so we'll try and make that happen. My boss said, Mike, you've got to build them a mobile app, but it's got to be cross-platform. Now at the time, Qt didn't have a cross-platform solution for mobile. They've now got QML, but it's still not native. You get native performance, but it's their own version of what a UI should look like. And I didn't like that. So I actually went down the option of building an app using jQuery Mobile. And it was a pretty horrific development experience for me. I'd gone from a real IDE down to a text editor. The product that we actually shipped to the customer, they said it looked okay, because actually if you took a screenshot, it looked lovely. But when you actually used it, it was horrible. So I hated the development experience, and the customer hated using it. So I thought there's got to be a better way. And so I Googled .NET on iPhone. And Xamarin came up, and this was about 4 years ago now. I pulled out my credit card and I bought a license. And over the weekend, I hacked to get together an iOS app. And it did everything and more that the web app did, which had taken me 6 weeks to produce. Because I'm no JavaScript developer, and I hate HTML and CSS. I'm not comfortable doing all of that. Give me a real language, a real IDE, any day of the week. So I hacked together this native app, and I went into work to my boss, and I showed it to him, and he instantly assumed that I built it with Objective-C. And he's like, Mike, you've wasted your weekend. We can't use this. I was like, one moment, Simon. Let me show you this. He's like, that's not Objective-C. What is that? I was like, that's C-sharp. And I took 80% of that code and I built an Android version the following week. So he was blown away and I was top boy for a whole week. And then I handed in my resignation and I started work for Xamarin. So we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk about Xamarin. And I'm going to be talking about the platform tools specifically, but we've also got Test Cloud, which we're going to hear a little bit about later. I hear it's very local, it's just around the corner, is that right?
It's true. It's like 200 meters.
So you should invite them over. So we're going to hear about Test Cloud afterwards, which is our automated testing solution, which is amazing. But we've also got Xamarin Insights. So if you're a .NET developer, which a lot of you are, if your apps crash out there in the wild, you probably don't know about it. Now with Xamarin Insights, we'll catch any uncaught exceptions and we'll report them to you. Now we don't just consume the exceptions, we throw them again so that they still happen, but we'll report it straight to you so that you can go ahead and fix those issues. Now it's entirely free for Xamarin developers. There is going to be a small fee for that for non-Xamarin developers, but if you've got a Xamarin license, the crash reporting is always free. It's one line of code to get installed. You just go to NuGet, you search Xamarin Insights, and it's xamarin.insights.initialize, your unique key, and boom, you're good to go. So it's a no-brainer to find out why your apps are crashing and to deliver a great experience to your user. And this is all underpinned by Xamarin University, so if you want to learn Xamarin in depth, we have online tuition, which you can sign into webinars, and you'll have an expert in a particular field teach you everything you need to know about going mobile. So they'll teach you about cell reuse in iOS. They'll teach you about different garbage collectors and how to tame the linker when it starts to break your generics. So they really are an expert. And we've had one guy take 6 weeks to go through it, but he was a genius. But it normally takes about 6 months to go through the whole procedure. And then you do a 2-hour multiple choice test. And if you pass the test, and it's pretty difficult, the team will send you a lovely glass plaque to say, congratulations, you're now certified as a Xamarin developer. But that doesn't mean much. What it really means is that it's a license to print money. So Xamarin certified developers in the UK can command about £1,000 a day as a contractor. So it's a very, very lucrative thing to have. So if I didn't work for Xamarin, I'd make sure I was certified and I'd be going out there to all those companies being like, hire me. So it's well worth looking into. So I want to talk a bit about how we might be architecting our mobile apps today. So there are a couple of ways to build mobile apps today. One of the most common is what I like to call the siloed approach. So this is where we write our app for iOS using Swift or Objective-C. We then go ahead and write it again for Android using Java, and then we may want to hit Windows Phone, which in the UK is about 2% of the market share. Now what's interesting with Windows Phone is that although it's only 2%, they spend on average the same as iOS users. It's Android users that don't spend any money. So if you want to earn some cash, you should probably go iOS, Windows Phone, and then Android. So it's a bit strange there. But do we have anyone that's developed their app in this approach? You started once with, yeah, there we go. It's a pretty easy situation to fall into. Your boss comes to you and they say, we need to go mobile. And you download Xcode because you're like, we'll do iOS, it's the easiest. You build your app using Objective-C. It's a proof of concept. It's never meant to be released. You're just trying to get a feel for what you want to create. Marketing see it, and all of a sudden it's in the App Store. And you're like, how did that happen? And your boss says, the iOS app is fantastic. We've got 5-star reviews. We need to go and do it for Android. So you download Android Studio or Eclipse. You start writing some Java, and you're like, no one's shown marketing. But they still find it, and all of a sudden you've got an Android app in the Google Play Store, and you're like, I didn't want to have to maintain 2 code bases. This is madness. And you're using 2 different tools. And as I say, you may want to do Windows Phone. It's basic, C# and Java are basically the same, just uppercase, just lowercase, you're good to go. So, you're using 3 different IDEs. You're reinventing the wheel for every single platform. There's no code reuse. This is a pretty slow and expensive way to develop your application. Now, I like to find the positives for everything. The big positive for this approach is that you get a native UI and you get native performance. So that is probably the only benefit to this approach. On the flip side of that, we've got the hybrid approach, which is the holy grail of software. The idea that we can write something once and run it everywhere. We all want that, but the reality is what we ship is a subpar product. Now, I've used this approach. I hated the development experience, but I understand that there are people out there that love JavaScript and they love HTML and CSS. So, the development experience for them is delightful, but actually the end result of the app is still horrible for the end user. I wouldn't be writing beer drinking as a native app if Untapped was native. It's a fact that the leading competitor is hybrid, and it's just a horrible experience as an end user that's forcing me to reinvent the wheel, but natively. Now, one bonus for this approach is that if you've got customers and you've got no competitor, you can ship anything. They have no choice. They can't go anywhere else, so you may as well use this approach. But if you do have a competitor and your customers can go elsewhere, then you probably want to go native. Now at Xamarin, we say you should still have the benefits of code reuse, but you should build your UI for each platform so that it's native. So we're saying you should share about 80% of your code across all 3 platforms. So that's shared C#. That's anything that's touching the base class library. So that's system.net, system.xml, system.link, all the namespaces, and in turn all the classes that you've been using for years. So there's a real high chance that a lot of the libraries that you've built, all that business logic that you've built in C#, we can just run on iOS and Android without any modification. And then you go ahead and build your UI once in iOS using storyboards. You'd build it again for Android using Android XML. And then for Windows Phone, you'd use XAML. Now, I want to show you an example of an app. This is using Xamarin Mac, but they also hit some mobile platforms. This is a vector drawing package built entirely in C# using native APIs. This is a native application, and it's highly graphical. So you would imagine that kind of top 25 that's unique to the platform, that top 25% would actually be a bit higher. But I want to show you the real statistics for the code for this app. So on Android, the developer saw about 72% code reuse, which isn't bad. 28% of the app was unique to Android. But this, as I say, is a vector drawing app. We expect this is the worst kind of scenario for building a cross-platform app because it's so graphical, it's so tied into the native APIs. For iOS, he saw 61% code reuse across all of the platforms. But then for Mac, he saw 84% code reuse. And the way he got that is iOS and the Mac have a common foundation. So it's really easy to convert your code from iOS over to OS X. So as I said before, it's an untapped market. If you've built yourself an app for iOS, do look into porting it over to Mac. So C# is really a cross-platform language. You can run C# on iOS, Android, Mac, Azure, on watches. You can run it everywhere. But we also love F#. So do we have any F# developers in the room? No? They are an endangered species. So if you see one, do snap a photo because they're very, very rare. They do exist though. I see one every now and again. Now, F# is an amazing language. If you're interested in Swift, you should probably look at F#, simply for the fact that F# is like Swift version 3. It's pretty cool. So as I mentioned before, that shared code is the base class library. That's the stuff we've been using for years. Now, just like when Microsoft give us some new APIs, we're not fazed by it. We're like, we know what we're doing. We've got this. This is easy. Well, we've done exactly the same for iOS. So it's that base class library. You're going to bring all your libraries in, all your NuGet packages that you love. We'll just bring those in. We'll use them. It's not a problem. But then we'll give you some new APIs. So we'll give you a one-to-one mapping to every single API that the Objective-C and Swift developers have access to. So there's nothing that those guys can do that we can't do in C#. And then we go ahead and do exactly the same for Android. So all that lovely code that we've got, we're just going to bring it across. And then boom, we've got a one-to-one mapping to every API the Android developers have access to. Now, to put that in real terms, I had a customer email me when I was on the support team a few years ago. And he said to me, I want to be able to recreate the dialer for my Android device. I want a Xamarin Android app for dialing my contacts and receiving calls. I was like, I'm not sure that's possible. Is there an API to do that? And he's like, well, there's apps in the Google Play Store that can do it. I was like, we can do it then. Let's make this happen. And we got it working. With a bit of reflection, it works perfectly. I won't name his app because it was utterly hideous, but that's more of a reflection of his design skills than the actual product itself. Now, you may be thinking it sounds like magic, because how do you get .NET running on an iPhone and on Android? Surely there is some magic there, but it's really not. Who here has p-invoked into a native library? So a couple of you. Well, you already know then how this works. So we've effectively created wrappers around the native libraries. So Microsoft, when they invented .NET, they had this C-bound API, which was Win32. It was a pretty awesome API, but they wanted to be able to call into it from a managed language. So they created platform invocation. And we've taken that approach and we've extended it to iOS and Android. So what we ship to you, we ship a lot. We've got all the tooling, all the compilers and the ahead of time compilers, the linkers and all that stuff. But really what it is at the basic level is platform invocation to native APIs. So I want to talk about performance quickly, because performance is really important with a mobile application. You can't have a mobile app that's slow. Users hate it. People pull out mobile apps to use when they're waiting for a coffee. They're stood there waiting for the barista to pass over the cup so that they can go. They're not loading up the application, waiting 30 seconds for it to pull down data. You need to be doing things like offline caching and syncing, syncing your data back up to the cloud. Now, for iOS, when you hit build in Visual Studio, we're going to take your IL, which is just how your WinForms and WPF apps run. We're going to ship it over to a Mac. Now, I've got a Surface Pro in my bag, Surface Pro 3, and that is my go-to general day-to-day development machine. It runs Visual Studio, it's beautiful. And the Surface Book gets me even more excited. Has anyone seen that? Yeah, it's pretty cool, especially when the screen comes off. So my general day-to-day machine is a Windows machine, but I need a Mac somewhere on the network in order to build iOS apps. And the reason for this is we use the iOS toolchain. So we take your IL, we convert it to a bytecode that we can feed through the LMVM compiler. And that's the same compiler that Apple uses for Swift or Objective-C apps. So we get exactly the same optimizations as an app built with Objective-C or Swift. But because I have to have that Mac there, when I come out on the road and I do presentations, I tend to sport a Mac, because there's no guarantee of what a network is going to be like at a conference. Often they've got isolation on with the Wi-Fi, so that even if I've got my Surface Pro just sat here, it can't communicate to my Mac. So what I do is I run a VM. So I run Windows 10 inside a virtual machine on the Mac, and it communicates to the host OS underneath. So it's pretty nice. But as I say, we feed it through the LMVM compiler, and we do this ahead of time compilation. So by the time we get the .app, it is just an ARM assembly. On Android, we can JIT, so we do. We do have an option to do ahead of time compilation for Android as well. But most apps that are built with Xamarin Android today use the JITting approach. So we just link your IL and we feed it over and we run it in the mono runtime, which we run alongside Delvic. Now I want to show you some stats on performance. So this was created by an ex-Googler. So he was an early employee at Google, and he did very well out of that. He now owns a racing car team, and I believe he just drives around in circles with the team. But they wanted to be able to build an app. And he's an engineer at heart. So when he was looking at the options, he really wanted to look at the options. So he wrote some sample code for each not even cross-platform, but each mobile solution, and benchmarked it to be able to see how does it perform. And you'll see here that Xamarin iOS actually performs very well. So if we compare it to an Objective-C app, we tend to see Xamarin iOS performs better. But naturally, we're not as fast as C++. I think we can all expect that C# isn't going to be as fast as C++. But the performance gains we get as developers are huge. But actually, we're still under a second. So this is all very marginal. Unless you're using RubyMotion, which is horrifically slow, you're pretty much golden no matter what you choose. The key thing here is there is no performance hit through using Xamarin iOS. Now, if we look at Android, we see a similar thing. So we actually see that Xamarin Android is fractionally faster than building an app using Java. So if you go to github.com/Xamarin, you'll see that they implemented a whole load of Android using C#. So they used a Java to C# converter, and then they ran some benchmarks, and they're seeing some significant performance increases through using C# instead of Java. So again, with Android, there's no performance hit, there's actually a marginal performance gain. Now these performance gains, your users will never go, wow, the app is so much faster now, because it's fractions of a second. But it's just worth noting that you're not going to be sat there with like the titanium and waiting for 20 seconds when it should just take 0.1 of a second. So here's actually open source, all the code that uses to benchmark this. So if you think that you can write the code better, he does accept pull requests. This is actually the second version of the stats that he created, because he admitted from the get-go that he wasn't an Objective-C developer. So he had a whole load of guys that were Objective-C developers refactor his code and make it more performant, and they reran the tests and the benchmarks still come out. So this is open. If you want to go and have a look at the code that generated all of this, do feel free. The link is at the bottom. I think we'll probably try and share the slides at the end of this. So the key thing is that anything an Objective-C, Swift, or Java developer can do, we can do in C# using Visual Studio. So we really aren't limited in the kind of apps that we can create. And this means C# runs on 2.6 billion devices. So it really is a cross-platform language. So this is the world's most hideous slide, but I think it just shows you what devices C# will run on. So you see there, we've got an Apple Watch. We've got iPhones, we've got Android TV, we've got a Netduino, so we can do microprocessors. We've got a PS Vita, a PlayStation 360, a PS4, Microsoft Band. We can even run C# on our glasses. It's madness. Now you will note that the Xbox One isn't on there. Now don't ask me how .NET runs on a PlayStation 4 and not an Xbox One. Classic Microsoft. But it is coming. With Universal Apps, you will be able to run your .NET code on a PlayStation, with an Xbox One as well. But these are just consumer devices. But it's also fun to know that we can run Azure in the cloud, C# in the cloud with Azure. So it really is a cross-platform language. My history in professional development was C++. And for the longest time, I thought that was the most cross-platform language. And it still is. But for the platforms I care about and the platforms that are really easy to monetize, I can do it all in C#. And actually, C# is a way nicer experience than C++. I don't have to worry about disposing of objects and memory management and all of that rubbish. The computer's far more intelligent than I am, and I can leave it to do it for me. So we're always up to date, and this is really key. What we don't want is a situation where Apple come out with some new APIs and we as C# developers are falling behind by 6 months. We don't get access to all the lovely new APIs that the Objective-C and Swift guys have access to. Or the same with Java, Google come out with some new APIs and some new features and we've got to wait 6 months. That would be a nightmare. So we have same-day support, and we've had it since iOS 5. So you can guarantee that when Apple come out with some new APIs, we'll have a super quick turnaround to get those APIs into your hands so that you can start playing. We've already got bindings for the 3D touch for the new iPhone 6s. We've already got underway bindings for tvOS. In fact, did anyone see the launch of tvOS? So this is the new Apple TV device. They've developed an app store for the box that plugs in, the media center of Apple, the box that plugs into your TV. Now, one of the games that they actually showed within the Apple presentation, within the keynote, was built using Xamarin. So it's pretty awesome. So I want to show you the traditional approach, and then we're going to jump into Xamarin Forms. Because 80% code reuse sounds pretty nice, but wouldn't it be great if we could do 100% code reuse? So I'm going to show you the traditional approach, which is that 80% code reuse. And then we'll go to 100%. So as I said before, you need a Mac somewhere on the network. So this is why I use a VM. At home, when I control the network, the Mac sits in the corner with its lid down, shamefully. I don't have to look at it. And I just use the Surface Pro, and it's a delightful experience. What a lot of developers will do is they'll buy a bottom-of-the-range Mac Mini, they'll stick a Windows sticker over the Mac logo, and they'll put it in their bottom drawer on the network, and they'll never look at it again. As long as it's somewhere on your network, you don't need to worry. Now, what we've done with the latest version of Xamarin, and this was released, I think it was released on Monday, so it's super, super new, is we've allowed multiple connections to the same Mac. So you can have multiple instances of Visual Studio. So you can buy just one Mac, shove it in a drawer, never look at it again, and have all your developers connect to it and use it as a build host. So the cost of starting with the Xamarin development in terms of hardware is actually quite low, because you've already got all your Windows PCs, right? Who here is a Mac user? Awesome. So I'm going to show you our IDE in Xamarin Forms, so you can be like, well, how do I do this without Windows? We've got you covered as well. So, as I said, I'm building this beer drinking app, and I would like to show it to you, but it's really complex. There's a lot of stuff going on in there. It's on GitHub, so feel free to go and look at it yourselves. But what I am going to show you is a really simple demo project that I've built. And again, this is on GitHub, but it's a lot simpler. Now, for those of you who have done iOS development, you'll know about things like the AppDelegate. So the AppDelegate deals with our application lifecycle. Now, because we've got the one-to-one mapping, this should all be really familiar to the Objective-C and Swift developers. We're inheriting from UI application delegate. We're overriding finish launching. We've got storyboards. We've got view controllers. We've got table view controllers. It's all the classes that the Apple developers know and love. We just expose it to you in C#. Now, what I really like is that we've got a storyboard designer. So Apple have their UI format as a storyboard. It used to be Zibs, and we support Zibs as well, but I wouldn't recommend using Zibs. And the reason I say don't use them is Apple is pulling away from them, and they're a nightmare to merge. So if you've got two developers working on a Zib, because it's just the object graph, when you try and merge it, if you don't merge it perfectly, and I've yet to be able to merge it perfectly, and I spent a long time trying to do this, you will destroy the Zib. It will be unusable. And you'll have lost, potentially a few days worth of work of two developers. So just don't use Zibs. Use storyboards. It's delightful. Classic. So we'll connect again to the Mac side of thing. There we go. We'll update the storyboard. We can see here that it's not quite connected yet. It's getting there. It will turn green when we're good to go. But the key thing here is that this storyboard is the same storyboard that I could have generated in Xcode. So for those of you who have got your existing iOS apps built with Swift or Objective-C, you can drag your storyboard into Visual Studio or Xamarin Studio and continue editing. It's 100% compatible. And actually what I do is I'll often, in Xamarin Studio, want to use auto layouts, and I learned auto layouts in Xcode rather than Xamarin Studio. Now we do auto layouts in Xamarin Studio, but I feel more comfortable doing it in Xcode. So I'll open up my storyboard in Xcode, do my auto layout, save it, and then bring it back in to Xamarin Studio. So I can just choose whichever IDE I want to do my UI in. There's no limitation. There we go, we've got the UI back. Now we've got access to every single control that the Objective-C and Swift developers have access to. We can even make custom controls and live render it on the screen. So if I inherit from UI view and override the draw method, boom, we can visualize it live within the storyboard designer. So I'm going to show you the code behind for this view controller. It's a table view controller, and we can see this by the fact that I've inherited here from UI table view controller, which is an iOS class. Now, this app goes out and uses BreweryDB, which is a RESTful API for querying beers. Again, the code is all on GitHub. In fact, that same code that I'm using to query BreweryDB is running in Azure for beer drinking, because I wanted to be able to swap out my beer provider at any time without causing any issues to my clients. So the same C# running on a device and in the cloud, it's amazing. But I just want to show you how long this code is. It's not ideal. All I'm literally doing is, in this, I'm searching in a view model, which is where it's all the RESTful service. I'll show you. We've got BreweryDB client. This is where I go off to BreweryDB, I fetch some data, I'd return a list of beers. It's not very complex. I've got my search view model. I love leaking API keys. This is my favorite thing, so feel free to photo that. So this is where the magic happens. That view controller is literally just, the search table view controller is literally just calling into that code, taking the beer results, creating some sales, and showing it on the screen. But it's 122 lines of code. It's, and I can't share any of that code. I can share the view model, and I can share the brewery DB code, but the bit for displaying it on the screen is still 122 lines of code that I'm not able to share. I just want to deploy this to the device so you can see what it looks like. We'll scale that. Potentially not that big. That's iOS, that's not us. So it's worth noting that we actually use the iOS simulator. So you have to have Xcode installed and the Apple SDK. Because we're using their toolchain, you have to have Xcode somewhere on your Mac. So we'll try that again. It's launching the simulator. And I can debug this like you would debug any standard .NET application. I can whack a breakpoint in, it will hit it. I can look at the variable values. So I'm going to do sometimes, and as I say, isn't a Xamarin issue. This is just a problem with Xcode. Sometimes it doesn't want to boot, which is ideal when it works perfectly when you're sat on the sofa in the corner. Delightful. Okay, I know what I'm going to do. We'll try 5S instead. So we'll wait. Now it's worth noting that you should always deploy to a physical device when you're testing. This seems more positive. There we go. So it seems that that particular simulator has become corrupt. Who knows why? I'll look into it later. But it's worth noting that you should always deploy to a physical device when you're doing your testing, which is why Test Cloud is really important. And the reason for that is the iOS simulator has access to all the resources of your computer. So you can build an app that's really performant in the simulator, but if I did that, wrote some horrible code, I've got access to 4 i7 cores and 16 gigs worth of RAM, which is slightly more than your average iPhone. So by the time you ship it to the customer and you're like, yeah, it works fine on my computer, and they're like, well, it's terribly slow. And you're like, well, it's because you've not tested on the device and you've not found the problems. Perfect. Love good code. Well, we'll skip this. It's on GitHub. It works perfectly yesterday. So Xamarin Forms. You saw that 122 lines of code that was unique just for displaying some stuff in the UI. I wanted to share more code, so I rebuilt that sample in Xamarin Forms. So Xamarin Forms is an abstraction above that one-to-one mapping. So we saw that there were controls that were common across all of the platforms. In this case, you can see the map view. Well, the map view on Apple is an Apple map, so good luck finding where you need to go. On Android, it's a Google map, and then on Windows Phone, it's a Bing map. But they're basically the same thing, but the APIs we use to interact with these is vastly different. So we can't share any code, but it's doing the same thing. So this was mad. So we've abstracted the differences away from you and given you one common API so that you can share even more code. So our marketing team would love me to say that it's 100% code reuse, but it isn't. And I'm not going to stand in front of developers and say it's 100% code reuse. In a best case scenario, you're looking at 99.9% code reuse. And the reason it's not 100% is because there's a couple of lines of code that's unique to every platform project. So for iOS, Android, and Windows Phone, that's unique in order to get Xamarin Forms initialized. But if you go with that 99.9% code reuse, what you're going to get is a 100% native app that looks really ugly. So you're going to need to do some customization. And that's why I always like to talk about the traditional side first. iOS has about 33,000 APIs. Android has about 40,000 APIs. If you don't dig into those within Xamarin Forms and start to customize using those platform-specific APIs, you're not taking full advantage of the power of Xamarin Forms. So Xamarin Forms is great as it allows you to quickly and easily build 100% native apps. You're able to mix and match. So as I say, those 33,000 and 40,000 APIs are allowed to jump down into them and consume them. You're not stuck at this really high level abstraction. When you want access to platform features, you can have access to them. So what's included? Well, we give you 40 pages layouts of controls, and these can be built from either code behind, so C#, F#, or XAML. So do we have any XAML developers in the room? Yeah, so XAML's pretty awesome. For those of you who haven't used XAML, it's amazing, and I'll show you why in a minute. But because we use XAML, you can expect that we've got the MVVM approach, so we've got two-way data binding. Now, who's used MVVM to develop an app? Yeah, so it feels like magic. It's a bit like MVC, but with more V's and M's and less C's. If you remember that, you've pretty much got it down. We give you a consistent navigation and animation API. We give you a dependency service, which is a bit that allows you to drop down into the platform-specific code to get from that really high abstraction down to the bits that you're interested in. And we give you a messaging center, which allows objects to communicate to each other that have no concept of each other. So it's a kind of contract between objects, and they use the messaging center to marshal events. It's very, very nice to avoid spaghetti code. But actually, it's about one class in Xamarin Forms. It's very, very small. But in terms of what it does for us developers, it's amazing. So we conform to the 2009 XAML specification from Microsoft. So for those of you with binoculars, you may be able to see the differences here within the XAML. But I'll show you some XAML in a moment. But it's really the same. The keywords are different. So instead of being like a stack panel, you'll be using a stack layout. But once you've mastered where the differences are, it really is the same. You can take your existing XAML knowledge and bring that over to iOS and Android. So what pages do you get? Oh, you get a content page, you get master detail, navigation, tabs, and carousel. Now, tabs pages are interesting because on iOS, tabs live at the bottom, on Android, they live at the top, and on Windows Phone, they're just a carousel. Now, because we map to a native type, we don't have to tell the OS where to lay these out because the OS knows where to lay those controls out for us. So everything's positioned where we want it to be. Now, obviously, we're going to want to have control over our layouts, so we give you a couple of layout options. Now, when I'm building Xamarin Forms apps, it tends to be proof of concepts or prototypes or samples to give away to customers. So I tend to be writing these in a pretty lazy approach. So I tend to use the stack layout, and I'll sometimes throw a stack layout inside a scroll view. And the reason I do that is that the stack layout is a managed layout. So Xamarin Forms will deal with all the different sizes of Android devices and all the different sizes of iPhone devices to make sure the app looks great on those screen sizes. Whereas at absolute or relative, I've got to do more work. And when I'm building Xamarin Forms apps, I tend to be a bit lazy. So it's down to you to decide what layout you want to use, but we've got lots of options for you. So what controls do we have access to? Well, these are all the controls that we found were common across every single platform and that we could map properties and events quite clearly for you to use. Now, you may be thinking the animation has stopped, or I'm a very poor designer, but the gap at the end is actually where you can add your own controls. So there's a huge ecosystem of third-party controls available to you. If you just go onto NuGet and type in Xamarin Forms, you're going to find the community has created more than this list of controls that they think are worthwhile having, such as, user dialog. So, I want to show a toast or I want to show that something's loading. Well, they give you one API to do that across all three platforms. We've also got plugins for Xamarin. So if you want to get geolocation, that's common across all three platforms. Why should you have to write 3 sets of code for that? So they give you one API to call where am I at the moment, or vibrate, or device info. You can even go ahead and buy controls, so the likes of Sync Fusion or Infogistics. You can just go and buy their charting controls, and you've got yourself cross-platform dashboard built from one code base running across 3 platforms. So it's pretty cool. So I want to show you our IDE, and the forms equivalent of the app you just saw not working. So when you create a Xamarin Forms project or solution in Visual Studio, you're going to get 4 projects. You're going to get a portable class library. Now, with Forms, you have an option of using a shared library as well, but just don't use shared libraries. They're an awful way to develop your app. Use a portable class library. It's a little bit more work, but it's guaranteed to run everywhere perfectly. So you've got your portable class library. That is where your app lives. That's the views, the view models, your models, your business logic, all the bits that are important to you. And then in Visual Studio, you'll get the Xamarin Android project, you'll get a Xamarin iOS project, and you'll get a Windows Phone project. Now these reference that portable class library, and we can see that here. If we go into the reference, we'll see we're referencing basic beer forms. And if we go into the AppDelegate, which I mentioned is the application lifecycle in iOS, we can see we've got that couple of lines which takes us from 100% down to 99.9% code reuse. We write this for you. You don't have to do this. You just do file, new solution, boom, you're good to go. But when we look at it as a whole, there's always a couple of lines here and there that are unique to the platform. And we can come into Android for all you Android developers and look at the main activity, and boom, we instantiate and get ready for Xamarin Forms. So Xamarin Forms has got an entry point, just like iOS, which is a class that inherits from application. And we have a property which is main page, and here I'm creating a navigation page. So for iOS developers, that'd be like a UI navigation view controller, where you throw in some view controllers into a navigation stack and you get a nice header at the top. And I'm creating a new instance of search page, and then I go ahead and try and make it look pretty. So if we go into views, I want to show you the search page. So there's 122 lines of code for iOS have been condensed down to 19 lines of code, which now runs on iOS, Android, and Windows Phone. Now you can see here I'm doing some data binding. So I'm binding here to beers, and when I select an item, I'm setting it as selected beer. Now what I really like about Xamarin Forms is when I do something like select an item, instead of just passing the index of the item that I selected, we pass back the entire object. So it makes doing this data binding super, super easy. So let's have a look at the view model for this. Boom. You can see this is just a standard MVVM approach. This should be super simple to you. We've got the concept of commands. We're using iNotify property changed. It's just standard .NET processes running but on iOS, Android, and we can even run on Windows now. So take your Xamarin Forms and run on Windows Desktop as well as Windows Phone. And then we go, another API key. Love it. So let's run this and see if it works. Hopefully it will. And this is our IDE. It's built entirely in CSharp. It's open source as well. Now, I will say the bits you're seeing me use, the designers, they're not open source, naturally, but the IDE itself is. So if you like writing extensions and things, and you want to have a look at how we've built the IDE, or you want to write an extension, you can just go ahead and look at the code for it. It's pretty neat. So there we go. It's running, but it's big. Let's scale that down. Interesting. I wonder, I've got it. Well, there we go. Now I know what the problem is. That makes it a million times easier to fix. We'll connect to the internet. I should have picked up on the error, actually. Right, let's try that again. There we go. Well, hey. So the other code would have worked perfectly as well. But you can see here, I've displayed the results in the iOS simulator, and it looks all right. It doesn't look amazing. I can customize this more, but I wanted to show this 100% code reuse to get started with. And when I click on Duvel Single, I've got the description of the beer, and it's going to go ahead and load, and I am tethered, so it could take a while. It's loaded the image for me. Now, Xamarin Forms will cache that image in memory for us. So if I keep coming back and forth, the image will just load a lot faster. But I want to show you something interesting before we stop, is that square images are so yesterday. Everyone's making circle images now. How do we do that with Xamarin Forms? Well, that's the point that we're going to want to jump down into those platform-specific APIs. So I actually created a custom renderer. So if we look here, I created a class where I inherit from image. And I've called this image circle. Now the reason I inherit from image is that I want Xamarin Forms to know that if I haven't implemented this for Android or Windows Phone, it can infer that this should have been an image. I'll just bring up the base implementation, our normal version of what this should be. So if I don't implement this for Windows Phone and I ran the code, it wouldn't throw an exception and be like, whoa, you've not implemented image circle. It'd be like, well, it should have been an image. We'll bring in the Windows Phone image. It'll look lovely. But for iOS, I have implemented this and for Android. So we'll come in here and we'll see that I've added this at the top, just to register that I'm going to be implementing that class from the portable class library. And here you can find the implementation, which is an image circle renderer. So we can see that I've got this create circle method. And this is platform specific code. These are APIs for iOS. So this is part of the 33,000 APIs that are unique to iOS. And if I uncomment these and rerun the application, we're going to use this custom renderer to make that Duvel logo circular. And this is a key point with Xamarin Forms. It's super easy to do this customization, but if you don't do it, you're going to build a really ugly app. And I'll be honest with you, I see a lot of apps that people come and show me like, this is Forms. I'm like, I could have told you that before you even mentioned it. Because people aren't customizing their Forms apps. And these aren't scary APIs. The iOS and Android APIs really aren't that terrifying. You don't have to go very far into them in order to get the customization to make your app look beautiful. So we'll search for Duvel again. And there we go, we've got a circular image. And in fact, whilst we're here, we'll start up an Android emulator. So this is our Android player. Has anyone used the Google emulator? Congrats for getting here. It's probably still starting up. It's horrifically slow. So it takes about 2.5 minutes to get started because it's emulating the ARM chipset. And we don't really need to emulate when we're developing. We'll just deploy to a device. So we've got an x86 hardware accelerated simulator for you that starts in 17 seconds. And you'll note that I said it starts in 17 seconds after it started because I didn't want anyone to count. Sometimes it takes a bit longer, but it is substantially faster than the Google tools. So you don't have to use this. Microsoft make an Android emulator as well. So with Microsoft, Xamarin, and Genymotion all making Android emulators, Google now make the worst Android tools on the market. So congrats to them. So here we go. We've got the simulator started, I think. We're going to select Startup. We'll stop that. Now it's finding the device because it's using ADB, which is Android Debug Bridge. So if you're a standard Java developer, I saw a couple of you raise your hands. You're like, I don't want to pay for Genymotion and I don't want to wait around and grow old waiting for Google's tools. You can download our Android player for free. You don't need a Xamarin license and you can connect to it from Eclipse or Android Studio or whatever your IDE of choice is. So we'll see the app on Android. Now what I like about Forms is I'm no Android developer. You can probably tell, I've got an iPhone here and an Apple Watch here. I've bought into the iOS ecosystem. I'm not hugely proficient with developing Android apps. I can do it, but I'm not great at it. Xamarin Forms allows me to hide the fact that I'm not great at it because I can still build pretty nice apps with it. So let's search for something new. Let's search for Stella Artois, which is a nice lager from Belgium. It's a Christmas beer brewed in Leuven. Not that I've searched for Stella Artois in the app numerous times. There we go. Look at that. First brewed Christmas beer in Leuven. And it's going to go and fetch the image. And I've implemented the custom render for Android as well, so we get the circular image. So this is about 95% code reuse. And I can go and run this on Windows Phone as well. And it's extraordinarily basic in what it's doing. It's just calling some data and showing it in a list. But this is what a lot of apps are doing. They go and call the internet, they display it in some data, and you go into a detailed view. And you don't want to be writing 122 lines that are unique to every platform each time. You can just write 19 lines that are going to run everywhere. So it's a pretty compelling argument for why you should be using something like Xamarin Forms. And it's native, so what's not to love? So that is me for time, so thank you very much. All of this code is on GitHub, so it's mikecodes.net, so you can go ahead and look at that. Beer drinking's on there as well. I'm extraordinarily happy to accept pull requests on that, or if someone wants to build the Windows Phone version or the Android version, feel free, I'm not going to stop you. I've still got a lot to do on the iOS version. Or if someone loves Web API in Azure and wants to look through my terrible code there, feel free. As I say, I'm happy to accept pull requests and happy to give out licenses for Xamarin for people that are actually contributing properly to the project. So thank you very much.
Anyone who has like a quick question for Mike, I think we can take that before the break. Yeah? We can also just take the break and you can probably go ask Mike.
Well, David's very shy about questions.
Yes.
Could you briefly say a little about how the licensing options are for getting started as a developer?
Yeah, so I'm not a salesperson, just to qualify that. Yeah, I mean, I get confused by it as well. So we start off from free. We have a starter edition, which is crippled beyond belief right now. They are fixing that. So there is a limitation with the starter edition. So we count the lines of IL you produce, and we say 128,000 lines of IL, and we're going to say, your app's too big, you need to buy a license. Now, Xamarin Forms on its own is more than 128,000 lines of IL. So if you wanted to use Xamarin Forms, you're going to need a license. So it's not great. So the cheapest option to get started with Xamarin is to use Xamarin Studio on a Mac for iOS and Android. If you just want to do Android, you can use Xamarin Studio on a PC. It's $25 a month per platform, per developer. You can cancel your subscription after 1 month. So if money's really tight, you can go ahead and develop your iOS app. You've still got your 80% code reuse. Ship it, cancel your iOS subscription, then go and start an Android subscription and build your Android app, get it into the store, see if it's a success. If it is, go and get the business license or continue with the indie license. Now the business license is $1,000 per developer per platform. Now, they do give a discount of 20% if you buy both at the same time. They do give a further discount of 20% if you just phone them up. The sales team live for commission. They are always happy to do you a deal. Now, if you are a business, rather than just an indie developer looking to get the tools for Visual Studio, they have these things called ultimate deals. Now what they do is they look at your business today and how many developers you're going to be having working on your Xamarin project. So let's say you've got 5 developers that you're going to put to creating a mobile app. They will sell you a license for the 5 developers, which includes test cloud hours. It gives you Xamarin University for all 5 developers, and they get seats for iOS and Android. That's normally about 40% discount on the whole package, which is pretty good. But what it allows you to do is in a week's time or in 2 months' time or in 6 months' time, and you think, we're going to miss our deadline, we need to double the team, you don't pay any more. You just add them in. And at the end of the year, when we look at your subscription, we say, you've now got 10 developers. We're going to do you another deal. Because the idea is we want you to grow to 15 developers next year so we can get a little bit more money from you again. But as I say, I'm not a salesperson. I don't know exactly how they work it all out, but there are numerous options to make sure that we can work with whatever price points that you guys have. And also, I'm a developer evangelist, so I'm allowed to give away licenses for free. So I love pull requests. So are there any other questions?
Xamarin Studio on Mac, will you actually run in CSharp on Mac app?
Yeah, 100%. So this is all C#. Oh, you can't see it. I need to plug in.
The other way around, so you start with working with Visual Studio and providing on the Mac, and then you.
So if I'm developing C# on a Mac, I don't need Visual Studio anywhere. So I can use all the C# 6 features. We've got IntelliSense in there. We can do some ReSharper-like refactoring as well. So we can be like, this if statement is horrible. Let's fix that for you. So it is a full IDE in its own right. What we tend to see is Xamarin Studio is kind of our staging ground for features before we push it into Visual Studio. Because Xamarin Studio tends to be indie developers, Visual Studio is our enterprise style developer. So we'll develop something, throw it into alpha in Xamarin Studio and get feedback from it, and then iterate and iterate and iterate, and then bring it into Visual Studio. I really like Xamarin Studio. It is a very laser-focused IDE for mobile. I love Visual Studio, do not get me wrong. It's a phenomenal IDE, it's super powerful, but it does a million things that I don't need it to do. And when I right-click in Visual Studio, I'm often overwhelmed by the amount of options that I have. It's just never-ending. Whereas in Xamarin Studio, I can really focus on mobile. And it's a lot cheaper to start off with. As I say, it's $25 a month. And I spend more than that a night in the pub testing. But it is super cheap. So, any other questions? Perfect. Well, I am around for the whole afternoon, so if there's anyone here that's too shy to publicly ask, do come and grab me. I'm not that scary. So, thank you very much.